Well, there were some irregularities in Palm Beach County where some voters thought that they were voting for Al Gore, but because of the structure of the ballot and the way you punched in on the ballot, they actually ended up voting for Pat Buchanan by mistake.
The Democratic Party called a telemarketing firm and asked them to start making phone calls to selected voters in Palm Beach County to see, it's what they call push polling, to see if they had a problem with this ballot, this butterfly ballot. And as you recall, the next day, a number of these voters complained and even had demonstrations protesting that ballot.
People were totally confused. People didn't know what they were doing. They were changing their ballots. They were calling over, and they refused to let us tell them that if you want to vote for Al Gore, press 5. They refused.
And so there was some question about, whether they were talked into it. Or whether they just nearly needed somebody to remind them.
I remember meeting one particular woman there who was herself a Holocaust survivor, who said that she had not eaten or slept in 3 days.
Me and my husband, we made this mistake and we voted for Buchanan, but we hate him because he is, he was told that Hitler was a good man. And I'm very upset about it.
It does seem to me that those are probably not my votes. I do not feel well about that. I don't want to take any votes that don't belong to me.
I think a lot of the enthusiasm and a lot of the fighting instinct was fueled by all of this news about those butterfly ballots in Palm Beach County. And people were really in an uproar about that for the first 2 days. I remember running into Karenna down in a restaurant, Gore's oldest daughter, and she was saying, look, there are a lot of irregularities there. Look at all those ballots in Palm Beach County.
That was the noisemaker. It was immediately dramatic, and the noise level rose. And I think the Democrats brilliantly exploited the noise level out of the Palm Beach people.
The first wave in were the Gore operatives, organized labor, African-American leaders. Everyone showed up in Florida to try to collect affidavits and make the case.
They very quickly got a sense of where the problems were and which counties were ones in which it would be most fruitful and beneficial for them to file a court action. It didn't take a rocket scientist to know that those were likely to be Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. They're focused on the facts, gathering the facts in Florida, and telling the media and spinning the cable news networks and everybody else about what their side of the legal story was.
What they were doing on the ground was wiring it as best they could with their own canvassing boards, the Democrats dealing with the Democratic boards and the Republicans dealing with their counties. And it was very clear what was happening. Everyone was playing to their advantage.
Initially, there was a great deal of reluctance on the part of Democrats to come to the public aid of Al Gore. There was a great deal of concern at that time that Gore needed to make his case to the American people, and quickly, because public support would soon dwindle.
Because of what is at stake, this matter must be resolved expeditiously, but deliberately and without any rush to judgment.
If Gore was going to have the moral high ground here, he had to argue that the only thing he wanted to do was to count all the votes.
The fact is, Governor Bush would not want to win without counting all the votes. There's just no way that that is even a part of his personality or his agenda. But we knew that all of the votes that had been cast had been counted.
The first time I heard the word Chad, I was watching TV and they were talking about Chad this, Chad that, and I thought, oh my God, there's somebody named Chad that I should know about. And I was embarrassed because I was like, God, I'm wrecking my brain trying to think, who is this Chad guy who's responsible for the election?
What happened was there was an accelerated pickup for Gore. He went from 1,700 behind to 300 behind, like that, a sprint. And you figured all it takes him to do now is a few more counties recount it by hand and this is over. And I'm sure that's the way he looked at it.
Florida's voters, and indeed all Americans, are entitled to some finality in the election process.
And then the Republicans overplayed their hand. And the Republicans just went too far in what the Democrats thought was being arrogant. There was the photo op, the transition photo op that George W. had down in Austin, looking very much at the mansion as though, they were in the Oval Office. And the Democrats really got ticked off, and they began to see that public opinion was sticking with them. the polls came in, and American people were in no hurry to see this resolved. So at that stage, it all began to swing the other way for Al Gore.
Gore's election challenge was off and running until a new player appeared on the scene, an obscure Florida official who suddenly held all the cards.
Katherine Harris was immediately a big threat because politicians who had been studying Florida, and they were all down there, knew that she had power, she had statutory authority, and that she was very tightly connected to the Jeb Bush regime.
Katherine Harris started election week as an obscure state official assigned the purely ceremonial task of certifying Florida's election results. By week's end, she was the very symbol of the controversy, vilified by the Democrats, lionized by the Republicans. Harris tried more than once to declare George Bush the winner of Florida's electoral votes. The courts more than once told her, in effect, not so fast. Florida's partisan politics emerged front and center in the battle for the White House.
To me, one of the great things about this story has been how local it is. And I think Katherine Harris was the first person to be introduced, the first Floridian to be introduced in an intense way to the American public.
Good afternoon. As Secretary of State, I am Chief Elections Officer, and I
must say, I don't think she was prepared for it, and I'm not sure the American public was prepared for it either, because it was a train wreck for everybody involved.
Anyway, that woman that counted, she says she's 43 years old. I'd like a recount on that, okay? A recount on that, thank you very much.
What the Democrats didn't realize quickly enough until Katherine Harris materialized was that they felt that they had won the votes, but they didn't control the machinery. Katherine Harris was immediately a big threat. The politicians who had been studying Florida knew that she had power, she had statutory authority, and that she was very tightly connected to the Jeb Bush regime.
Are you going to rule out any possibility with the George W. Bush administration just so there is no appearance?
We're not even thinking about that. We're just focused on making sure that we carry out the rule of law.
This is American politics. It's not dirty necessarily. It can be very clean, but it's very aggressive and it's very unashamed. It's ruthless in the sense that you don't mind saying, oh, we got Katherine Harris, you've got the courts down there.
We've just come from an 8-minute meeting with the Secretary of State. She informed us that there would be a deadline of 5 o'clock tomorrow, that there will be no extensions of deadline for these purposes, and that any votes received after that time, that is the votes that come from the hand count, will be disregarded.
I think that she was in a very unfortunate position. Having been co-chair of the Bush campaign, she was just a perfect target for people who didn't agree with her decisions.
The night that stunned me was the night that the Florida Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, came out and said, we've received the recommendations from the counties as to why they want to proceed with the manual recount, and no, we're denying their rationale.
I've decided it is my duty under Florida law to exercise my discretion in denying these requested amendments.
That, I think, struck people as, wow, she really is going to move expeditiously to see that this slate of electors goes to Governor Bush.
This process must have a point of conclusion, a moment when America and the world know who is the next president. This is precisely why the laws of the state of Florida have deadlines for certification of the election vote.
She looks like she's a partisan for George W., and she is for George W., but I think she can do her role as the chief elections officer for the state, just as I can do my role as a member of the state election canvassing commission.
If I'm an elected a Democrat or Republican, I can be an honest person, a good person, a decent person, and still have a little bias. I mean, that's why I got there. I had a little bias. I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. And I don't think that should disqualify people unless you're dishonest.
Katherine Harris is one of the people that it's very difficult to get to.
Good afternoon, Secretary of State's office.
The one experience that I had in her office was when, immediately after all the criticism came, she got 300 or 400 bouquets of flowers.
The flowers and the encouragement were really meant a lot to all of us and our staff.
Well, she was very quickly demonized. I happen to know at the University of Pennsylvania there was a class in psychology on Katherine Harris and the way the media treated her.
Anyway, Katherine Harris, she's a Republican Secretary of State. Now, she has her differences with Al Gore, but there are some similarities. Show Miss Harris. There's Miss Harris here. Look at her. There she is there. Now, show Al Gore. See, I'm going to show you. Look, see? They're wearing the same makeup. Same makeup. Yeah. How about that?
Is there any fun in that, or is it all not fun, or some at least interesting?
Well, I think most of it is regrettable, but basically it wasn't going to impede our following the law.
Yeah, she got pretty rough treatment, but again, that had nothing to do with her judgment.
I'll read what I had. This is my little handy-dandy, not a diary exactly, but a calendar, just to keep things straight in my own mind. On November 17th, what I wrote in here was, "The incredible roller coaster news day!" Exclamation point, exclamation point. That was the day that the circuit court in Leon County ruled that Katherine Harris had properly certified the election.
Politics is Katherine Harris trying to help her guy get elected. It's Jeb Bush trying to help his brother without looking like he's doing something wrong. It's those Democratic judges with their liberal tendencies on that court down there, who, I don't care what they say, are liberals.
The Florida Supreme Court ruled that they were overturning the lower court decision by Terry Lewis, a Democrat, and saying that the Secretary of State could not certify the election results of election night, that there had to be these hand recounts. Then we knew all bets were off, and we were entering, some said, uncharted waters. I think it's more like the Twilight Zone.
The court holds that amended certifications from the county canvassing boards must be accepted by the Election Canvassing Commission through 5 p.m. on November 26 if the Secretary of State's office is open for the special purpose of receiving amended certifications.
There's no question but that the Florida Supreme Court rewrote the election code in substantial detail.
I mean, that was a unanimous 7-0 in favor of Vice President Al Gore, that the Secretary of State had just done the wrong thing.
That gave Gore both the legal and the political high ground. It was a good period for the Gore folks, and they were feeling very good about themselves right then.
When we come back, crisis and confusion in the Bush team.
It starts with a page at 5 o'clock in the morning, and you know something has happened. And the page was, Cheney's in the hospital.
Tuesday, November 21st, was not a good day for George W. Bush. It was 2 weeks after Election Day, and his narrow lead in Florida was put into jeopardy when the state Supreme Court suddenly ordered Katherine Harris to extend her certification deadline and accept late manual recounts on a new schedule set by the court. Then early the next morning, an even bigger crisis hit the Bush campaign like a thunderbolt. Dick Cheney was in the hospital.
Let's give a warm Pennsylvania welcome to the next Vice President of the United States, Dick Cheney.
To suddenly find out that the Rock of Gibraltar, Dick Cheney, is in the hospital, possibly having had a heart attack, it's pretty scary.
The NBC news desk called up on the other line and said, "We need you in front of the camera. Something's happened to Cheney."
Tim, good morning. How big a victory for the Gore campaign?
While I was on the Today Show, someone slipped me a note at the anchor desk, and I'm talking, and when I went back to Matt or Katie to ask me a question, I looked down and said, "Cheney taken to the hospital with chest pains." I thought it was a joke.
Cheney was first awoken by pain in his arm at about 3 o'clock in the morning. Immediately went with Secret Service agents and his wife to George Washington Hospital.
There, the chief of cardiology examined him, did what's called an electrocardiogram. His previous EKGs were then compared to the EKG, the tracing of his heart rhythm, that was done at that time, and it showed no change. So that was good news.
Cheney and Governor Bush spoke on the phone, and Cheney told Governor Bush at about 5:30 in the morning that he had not had a heart attack and that he was fine, not to be worried. The Cheney people, who are his press people, could not answer in detail questions about his condition, that all calls were directed to Austin and to Bush.